stop scrolling. I was sitting on my own porch, coffee cooling in my hands, when a clipboard snapped shut like a gunshot and changed everything. What started as a quiet morning turned into fines, threats, and a shocking accusation that still doesn't make sense. If you've ever thought your home was your safe space, stay with me, because what happened next proves how fast that illusion can shatter. I bought this house for peace. A small porch, 2 chairs, and enough sunlight to feel human again after long workdays. No loud music, no crowds, no drama. Just me, a book, and the slow rhythm of the neighborhood waking up. That morning was no different. Birds, distant lawnmowers, and the soft creak of the porch boards beneath my feet. Then a shadow cut across the steps. She stood there in pressed slacks and a polo with the HOA logo stitched like a badge of authority. Clipboard hugged tight, lips thin, eyes already annoyed. Without greeting me, she said my name like it was an accusation. I nodded, confused, and asked if something was wrong. She told me I was in violation. For sitting. I laughed, honestly thinking it was a joke. She didn't. She flipped the clipboard around and pointed at a highlighted line about loitering in common view. I reminded her this was my porch, part of my property, paid for every month. She said that didn't matter. The board had received complaints. Complaints about what? About me being outside too often. I tried to reason with her, explaining I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't blocking sidewalks or making noise. She cut me off and said the fine would be delivered by mail. Then she added something that made my stomach drop. If I continued, it could escalate into a public disturbance issue. Public disturbance. For sitting quietly at my own front door. Neighbors peeked through blinds as she walked away, heels clicking like punctuation marks at the end of my morning. I sat there stunned, coffee cold, wondering how comfort had turned into conflict. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control, and it was only beginning. I didn't know then that this single fine would open a chain of events involving letters, hearings, and threats that sounded unreal. I thought compliance would end it, that silence would keep peace. Instead, my porch became evidence. My routine became a record, and my patience became a test. That morning planted a question that still echoes. If this was allowed to happen here, how many others were already living under the same quiet pressure, afraid to sit, breathe, or exist in their own homes? And why was no one willing to speak up yet? The letter arrived 3 days later, slid under my door like a warning instead of mailed like normal correspondence. Thick paper. Official seal. The kind of envelope that makes your pulse jump before you even open it. Inside was the fine 154, ongoing public disturbance. Behavior, ongoing. As if sitting quietly had become a repeated offense worthy of documentation. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping I'd misunderstood. The letter cited timestamps, dates, and multiple resident complaints. No names. No descriptions. Just vague claims that my porch presence was disruptive to community harmony. I looked outside at the same porch, the same chairs, the same quiet street, and felt something shift inside me from confusion to anger. I decided to call the HOA office. After navigating automated menus, I finally reached a manager who spoke in a rehearsed calm, like this conversation had already happened dozens of times. When I asked how sitting could be considered a disturbance, she said perception mattered more than intent. If residents felt uncomfortable, the board had a duty to act. I asked who felt uncomfortable. She said that information was confidential. That was when I realized the rules weren't written to protect people like me. They were written to be flexible weapons. Over the next week, I noticed things I hadn't before. A car slowing down whenever I stepped outside. Someone across the street, suddenly very interested in watering their lawn at the exact moment I sat down. Curtains twitching. Phones lifting. I wasn't paranoid. I was being watched. Every time I sat on my porch, I wondered if it was being logged somewhere. Added to a growing file with my name on it. Then came the warning notice. Not a fine this time, but a threat. Further violations may result in enforcement action, including involvement of local authorities. Local authorities. For a chair and a human body occupying it, I attended the next HOA meeting, thinking logic would win. I stood in a room full of folding chairs and forced smiles, explaining calmly that I wasn't breaking any laws, that I wasn't bothering anyone. A board member leaned forward and said my defensive tone was itself disruptive. Another suggested I enjoy my porch in moderation. Moderation. Of my own home. The vote was quick. The fine stood. The warning stayed on record. As I walked out, I heard whispers behind me. Words like problematic and attention-seeking. Hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't insulted anyone. Yet somehow I was the disturbance. That night, I sat inside instead of on the porch, lights off, watching the empty chair through the window. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a porch. It was about setting an example. If they could silence me, They could silence anyone. And I had a choice to make, stay quiet, or push back and see how far they were willing to go. The next morning, I made a decision that felt small but carried weight. I took my chair back outside. Not to provoke, not to perform, but to exist. I sat down slowly, deliberately, like someone reclaiming territory without raising a flag. The air felt heavier than before, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. 10 minutes passed. Nothing happened. No clipboard, no car slowing down. Just quiet. I almost believed the tension had been imagined. Then my phone buzzed. An email notification from the HOA. Timestamped 5 minutes earlier. Subject line, continued noncompliance observed. Observed. That word settled deep. The email stated, I had been photographed occupying my porch in defiance of prior warnings. It claimed this behavior demonstrated willful disregard for community standards. Attached was a blurry image taken from across the street. Me, sitting, reading, existing. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, unsettled by how normal it looked and how threatening it had become in their narrative. I forwarded the email to a friend who worked in property law. His reply was short, but alarming. They're building a paper trail. He explained that documentation, even weak documentation, could be used to justify escalation, fines, liens, legal pressure designed to exhaust rather than win. He asked me if I planned to comply. That question haunted me. Compliance meant disappearing from my own porch. It meant accepting that visibility itself could be punished. Resistance meant risk. Not dramatic risk, but slow, grinding consequences that chipped away at time, money, and peace. That was the trap. They didn't need to be right. They just needed me to get tired. Another letter arrived that afternoon, this one more aggressive. It accused me of causing unease among residents and referenced the possibility of a formal complaint to the city under public nuisance ordinances. Public nuisance. The phrase felt surreal, like I had wandered into the wrong legal universe. I decided to document everything. Dates, times, emails, photos. I installed a small camera, facing my porch not to spy, but to protect myself. If I was being watched, I would watch back. Legally, quietly, carefully. I printed the HOA rules and highlighted every section they claimed I violated. None of them clearly applied. That evening, a neighbor finally spoke to me. She whispered over the fence that she didn't mind me sitting outside, that she thought the whole thing was ridiculous. But she didn't want trouble. That was when I understood the real power at work. Fear. Not of me, but of the system that punished anyone who stood out. I went inside knowing one thing for sure. This was no longer just my problem. And the next move from the HOA would force everything into the open. The escalation came faster than I expected. 2 days later, a notice was taped to my door in plain view of the street. Not mailed, not emailed, taped. It announced that due to repeated violations and community complaints, the HOA had formally reported me for public disturbance behavior to local authorities for review. Seeing those words displayed like a public shaming made my hands shake. I called the city office listed on the notice before panic could set in. The clerk sounded confused. She told me no officer had visited, no citation had been issued, and no investigation had begun. What the HOA had done, she explained carefully, was submit a complaint, not a finding. The accusation was real, but the authority behind it was thin. That distinction mattered more than they wanted me to know. Armed with that information, I requested a formal hearing with the HOA and sent a certified letter disputing every claim. I included timestamps, photos, copies of their own rules, and a statement asserting my right to quietly enjoy my private property. I didn't threaten. I didn't insult. I documented, calmly and thoroughly. The hearing room felt different this time. The board members avoided eye contact. The manager shuffled papers instead of lecturing. When they presented their evidence, I countered point by point. I showed that my porch was not common property. I showed there was no noise complaint, no obstruction, no legal definition that fit their accusation. When they mentioned resident discomfort, I asked how discomfort outweighed property rights. Silence followed. Not agreement, not apology, just the kind of quiet that signals retreat. After a brief recess, the board announced their decision. The fine was rescinded. The warning was removed from my record. The complaint to the city would not be pursued further. They framed it as a miscommunication, but we all knew better. Control had failed this time. I walked home feeling lighter, but not victorious, because nothing about the process protected me from it happening again. What protected me was knowledge, records, and refusing to shrink. That porch was never the problem. Visibility was, and the moment I stopped being easy, the system backed off. That evening, I sat on my porch again. Same chair, Same quiet. This time no shadows crossed the steps. No cameras lifted. A few neighbors waved. One even smiled. The power dynamic had shifted. Not because I won, but because I stayed. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Rules can be bent. Language can be weaponized. And silence is often mistaken for agreement. Your home is not a privilege granted by a board. It's a right you live in every day. Sometimes, simply sitting where you belong is the loudest statement you can make. If you're fed up with unfair HOA rules and power-tripping Karens, hit like, subscribe for real HOA stories, and comment below. Has sitting on your own porch become a crime now?